Chapter 5.
Once my bullying problems were over, it was a beach party every day. Well, at least in my room, where I would dance for joy as music blasted out of the stereo system. But I was celebrating alone because no one knew what I had been going through. At home, I hadn't told my parents because I didn't want to worry them. And I was the older of 4 siblings, so I had a sense of duty to be strong for them and not appear weak. In school, well, the other kids had always been as scared of bullies as me, so dead end there as well. And it was useless to tell the teachers who were too busy running the lessons and trying to control the class. Plus, like I've said before, the bullying might have gotten worse if you were seen as a tattletale. But as it turned out, that year someone had noticed what I was going through. It was the last Monday of the last full work week of 6th grade. As usual, Mr. Bullard asked us to copy down the spelling words of the week in our notebook as he wrote them on the board. Most of them had to do with topics we covered in our textbooks, except one word he wrote down was my name. What? All the kids started whispering and giggling and smiling at me with disbelief. Some kids, like me, had read the Trojan War book that he had in his class, but most hadn't. So when the kids asked why was my name on the board, he just turned around and gave no explanation as to why he included it. He just looked at me with a slight smile, as if saying,
I know you've had a tough year, kid, but you're going to be okay. I believe in you.
And that's when it hit me. He was the one who set up the meeting with the psychologist and was also probably the one that suggested I go to the other school to avoid the bully. In all my school years, no one had ever taken notice that I was struggling with being bullied. And if they had looked the other way for whatever reason. And then this truly gifted teacher had been doing his best all year to set me up for success on my voyage. The rest of that week, I think I walked a little straighter and taller. The last week of school, we had the traditional end-of-year field day games. Even though I knew I'd be placed on the tug-of-war team for the 4th year in a row for being overweight, I was really hoping to be in another event as well. Zach and I had continued to be close friends, and he agreed to be my partner for the 3-legged race. And we qualified by outrunning our classmates. In the school-wide competition, we came in 3rd out of 20 teams. Zach and the rest of our classmates were happy, but I wasn't really that proud. Throughout that year, I had to face the reality that sports were not going to be my thing. There were boys who were way more talented. They were faster and just had more skills at playing games. But that was okay. I had science and I had art. On the very last day of school, we said goodbye to our classmates, many of whom would be going to different middle schools in the area. As I was walking around the class, shaking hands with the boys, I heard some of the girls crying and hugging. It freaked me out. The year before, no one cried when we left 5th grade. And then suddenly, the girls were sobbing dramatically. At the time, I didn't understand. We had only just met most of those kids versus elementary school where we had known our classmates for years. On the final bus ride home that year, I racked my brain, trying to figure out what had just happened. Why were those girls crying? Something had changed. But what? And then in a flash, it hit me. All those lessons that we had had in 5th grade about the changes that were going to happen in puberty. It hadn't escaped me that during the year we had all started to develop physically, and naturally the girls were faster than the boys. But what I had witnessed in those tearful goodbyes between the girls were the mental changes that weren't so obvious. It was official. While most of the boys were still building castles made of sand, the girls and some of the guys had found boats and were well on their way to crossing the sea of adolescence. Lucky for me on my voyage, I could always count on a rest from the sea life when my family would fly to my mom's homeland every summer. The main camp was set up in my grandmother's house, where we lived like locals for weeks on end. But the highlight of the trip was when we retreated deep into the mountains and forests to stay in a rural cottage with our uncles, aunts, and cousins. Those days usually started with a big breakfast and then a hike to pick fruit off the trees. To cool off from the midday heat, my cousins and I would go down to the river for a swim, fish, or to hike up and down the banks. By the time the afternoon rain set in, we were all sleeping siestas on hammocks. The evenings after supper were spent playing games or singing old folk songs. When the energy died down, we would stare out into the starry sky, listening to the music of the night provided by the insects and frogs. Our Grandaunt Marie, who owned the cottage, would shuffle over to where we were, sit in her old rocking chair, and begin to tell us stories of adventures her father had had in those very same woods. Kids being kids, somebody would ask her if there were any ghosts or monsters in the trees. "It's funny you should ask that," she would say. "There's a legend of a man who was traveling home late one night. The moon was not yet full, but just enough to provide some light, which was good since most of his trip was on the road. But to get home, he needed to go through those woods next to the river you kids play at. Once he was deep into the forest, the crows started cawing, and soon after, he heard footsteps behind him. His nerves overtook him, and he started walking faster. The steps behind followed closely and grew heavier, like that of a great weight of a beast. He dared not look back for fear that what was following him was something unnatural. In the distance, there was a flickering of lights bouncing off the tree trunks, and he started running toward it, hoping that somebody would be there to help. The thing behind was gaining on him, and he swore he could feel heavy breathing down his neck. But his will to live was so strong that it made his legs move faster than they had ever done before. As he approached the light, he could see it was a campfire. Surely someone would be there to help, or at least he would be able to use a fire log to fight off the creature, he thought. When he stopped 3 steps in front of the fire, he could see that in the flames were the wings of a giant bird. In desperation, he grabbed a stone and quickly turned ready to face the danger behind him. And there it was, hiding in the shadows just outside the glow of the light. Then an indescribable sound filled the air. And from the fire arose a magnificent bird that circled the trees and swooped down at the menace that had been chasing the man. A flash of heat knocked the traveler down and blinded him for a minute. When he opened his eyes again, he could see that not only was there no sign of a beast, but with the flames of its wings, the bird had cleared a path directly toward the man's house. And without hesitation or fear, he calmly walked home because he knew he was safe. Now you may say, that couldn't have happened. It was all in his imagination. but I know it's true. Because that man was my father. And that road that leads to this cottage is the same one made by that bird, called the Phoenix. A few weeks later, I flew back to my hometown, and the countdown to another school year started again. Along with the familiar feeling of anxiety, only this time it was for different reasons than 12 months before. The challenges of 6th grade had forced me to face my childhood fears and become pragmatic at solving problems. And that was important in freeing me to be able to cast off to the open waters of adolescence. What had me worried, though, were the unknown choices and chances that lay ahead. I was terrified, excited, but hopeful about the adventure that lay in store for me. As I drifted toward the horizon of my teenage years, floating along the waves of emotions, I could faintly hear a familiar song from my past.
We hope you have enjoyed listening to this ordinarily unique book. To find out more about upcoming book releases and to support the project, please visit www.ordinarilyuniquestories.com. Music was composed and recorded by the author, except for the talents of Emma and Zoe on vocals, Lucas and Dave on drums. Ordinarily Unique is a registered trademark of the author. Copyright 2026, all rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including recording or other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the publisher, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain other non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. For permission requests, write to the publisher at ordinarily.unique.stories@gmail.com.